Welcome to the podcast, which is all about the world of direct response. Are we on the air? I'm your host, Shawn Wilsie, and for over 30 years I've hosted shows on cable shopping networks, and now I want to be your guide into this world as we look at the ever-changing nature of the industries. This is the first time in the 80-some episodes, I guess it is now, that I've done that I've had to start the show with a disclaimer, and I'm going to do that because the episode you're about to hear, it's going to be in two parts, has been pre-recorded. And since it was recorded, some things have happened that have changed and will impact the context at some points of the interview. The interview you're going to hear is with Paul Kelley, who was one of the original hosts at QVC, legend, who was my boss for a while at Shop NBC, and also with Marvin Segel, who's been on the show before. His dad started QVC back in 1986. And you will hear us discuss the QVC share price at the time of the recording, which was 13 cents a share. Now, since, in fact, literally just a couple days after we recorded this, QVC announced that they were going to do a 50-to-1 stock split. Now, what does that mean? That means that for every share that there is in existence, there's now it's divided into 50 parts, basically. So now that 13 cents a share is, as of this recording, is now worth $4.35 a share. Hey, that sounds great, doesn't it? $4 a share? That's so much more. No, because again, you've diluted the existing share. So in reality, if you take $4.35 a share and divide it by 50, it's actually 8.7 cents per share. So the price has actually gone down. Now, why has this happened? And again, this is something that your host here failed to really do at the start of the show. Before we started recording, Marvin and I, off air, were talking about QVC's revenue. They had released their results for quarter one 2025 and for the year. And we discussed it off air, but I forgot to bring that conversation on air. 13 straight quarters, basically. Here's a summation. 13 straight quarters declines, drops. For this most recent year, total revenue declined 10%. These are the highlights, by the way. Revenue at QVC and HSN declined 11%. Margin contraction 310 basis points. Free cash flow, use of $148 million compared to use of $27 million last year. Net debt, and a lot of this is coming due, $4.7 billion in net debt. Here's the big one. Customer count decline. QVC and HSN customer count down 10%. QVC International customer count down 3%. So this is the whole reason why I wanted to have Marvin and Paul on the show together, is to talk about QVC, what can save it, what's going on, and so that was the whole point of the conversation. But again, I do have to preface it because you're going to hear us talk about things in the before the 50-to-1 stock split was announced. By the way, if you Google search companies that have done 50-to-1 stock splits, it is a who's who of companies you've never heard of. Companies that did that to survive. And, well, the history books on those companies have been written. But just Google search. Companies that have done a 50-to-1 stock split and see what comes up. Anyway, so we're going to get started here with the interview. We'll pick it up in progress as I'm getting ready to introduce Paul and Marvin. This will be in two parts. It's about an hour total, and I like to keep the shows to about a half hour, so you will hear part one, and then we'll come back in 2 weeks with part two. So many of you are already familiar with Marv Segel. He has been on the show before. His dad is the founder of QVC, and we're going to talk about that. But I'm joined this time with a really special guest, and his name is Paul Kelley, and many of you who go back to the early days of QVC are very familiar with Paul Kelley because Paul was, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, you were one of the original hosts that joined in 1986.
One of the first 20.
I didn't realize that there were 20 at the start. That's interesting.
There were 20, and it got whittled down then to 12.
Okay. You know what?
And I made the cut.
Let's go along with this for just a second here, because since you're new to the show, people know Marv, so we can let Marv sit there and turn his air conditioning down for a minute or two while you and I chat. What was the audition process like for you joining QVC?
It was very interesting. The audition itself, with which I was paired with Bob Bowersox, or for which I was paired with Bob Bowersox, as a matter of fact, who was also one of the original 20. And he and I were the two last to leave.
Right.
We were two of the first in and the two last of the originals to leave.
Wow.
The process was very simple. You walked into a room. There was a guy named John Eastman sitting there, and he had some common everyday objects. And he just threw one at you and said, sell this for me to make me want it. So, and we did. First of all, we did it individually, and then we did it in pairs, knocked it back and forth. I got lucky because my audition piece was Churchill's History of the Western World set, a book set. And that for me was mother's milk. That's just like having to talk about my family. So that was easy. Bowersox actually was given a pen to sell.
Oh boy.
And another friend of mine who auditioned was given a pencil, and his audition was extraordinary. He did get hired, by the way. His audition was extraordinary. He was given a pencil, and he sat and he thought about it for a minute, and he said, "You may think this is a pencil, but what this is the first computer ever invented. When you plug this into the human hand, this becomes the stylus of a computer." And I thought that was absolutely brilliant.
Wow.
And he just spun off on that. There was so much creativity in that room. And once the 20 of us were chosen, we were then taken and closeted away for a week with a week's full of training. And we started at 9 in the morning and we ended at 6 at night. And we actually then went to a bar and ended at 9 at night. And we really got to know each other and we really got to bond. So that when we finally went on the air, we could almost read each other's minds. It was an extraordinarily brilliant way of creating that on-air force that wasn't just a group of individuals, but had this sort of interlocking consciousness that we've been working on for a full week every day. We knew all about each other, and we knew what each other's strengths and weaknesses were, and we knew where the hot buttons were, and we knew how to make somebody laugh, and we knew how to pitch somebody a straight line so that they would then riff on it and be able to take a product you would say to someone like Cindy Briggs Moore, well, Cindy, that perfume that you have there in front of you, that smells like X. And she would just go off on that. So we learned how to feed each other back and forth, Shawn. And I think one of the real brilliances, if I can use that sort of fractured word, of the way that Mara's father constructed that, because he had a hand in that construction, the way it was done was to get the most out of us, not just as individuals, but as a group, and to do it creatively as well as factually. It was quite an experience, and I can still remember sitting in that room, those rooms, today.
Marv, let's go back to 1986. Your dad is starting this whole thing. What was his intention when he started QVC?
Well, most people don't know the backstory, which is before QVC had a name, my father flew to Florida to meet with Paxson and Bob Sarcosta. They had both kind of stepped aside or stepped away for a little bit of HSN, the original shopping channel. And he went down there and asked a very simple question. And the question was, if you could do it over again, what would you do differently? And the answer to that question is what gave QVC its DNA in the early days. Even going back to, which is fun to reminisce about it, that my father had two game show producers on the board of directors. Before gamification had a name, he knew he had to keep the customer watching all the time. So by having the games that they did on air, it made it where you wanted to watch every hour because they were going to, spin the wheel. You're going to guess the word, the lucky number, all these crazy games they did. And unfortunately, and I'm not picking on a category, but the planners over time did away with the games, saying they were a waste of airtime, not understanding the principle of what they were. And that was unfortunate. And that's the question I get asked the most, which is, how did QVC get so big? And then basically what the F happened, because as I think I sent you, literally almost 10 years ago, QVC was over $30 a share. And today it's at about 13 cents, which is just insane. It's heartbreaking to me while I'm trying to help in my own way in maintaining my father's legacy.
Right.
Can I sort of speak to what Marvin just said?
Please,
Shawn?
please.
Marvin and I, this won't surprise you, we have conversations on a semi-regular basis, along with a few other people. But the thing that Joe Segel knew, that QVC knew, and that you knew in your early days, was that the core of the success of this business is essentially entertainment. It's connecting with the customer, because if the person on one side of the camera doesn't connect with the person on the other side of the camera, nothing happens, nothing works. And Joe Segel knew that, and that's why he instituted the games. And that's why he gave us such latitude in what we would do and say. We were totally non-scripted. And we had to rely on our own filters, but we knew what the customer wanted in terms from us, from the people that were speaking with them. And we didn't have any formulas, any algorithms at the time that we had to adhere to. And as Marvin said, not to single out a group, but the planners began to try and quantify the unquantifiable.
Right.
They began to they came up with these algorithms that said, if you did this and this and this and said this and that, then they would buy this, this, and that. And they would be in meetings with Today's Special Values post meeting, and they'd be scratching their heads and say, well, the formula said that should have worked. The algorithm said that should have worked. I don't understand why it didn't work. Well, you're right. They didn't understand why it didn't work. And by extension, they truly didn't understand why it worked when it did.
Right.
So
right.
It became a formulaic thing that got sterile. And that's what's happened.
Yeah.
That's what's happened to the industry.
They stopped having fun.
Marvin.
Yeah, they really did. I mean, again, we could talk for hours about this whole subject and what happened with the earnings call and everything else. I remember a couple of years ago, I was invited by a third party, Dr. Robbie Ludwig, to go to Joy Mangano's book reveal. I think it was Simon & Schuster or whoever did the book. And I walked in with Dr. Robbie, and here's Joy Mangano at the other end of the room. And I hadn't seen her maybe in 10 or 15 years. And it's a stuffy publishing boardroom, with a lot of people in suits and everything else. I was dressed nice also, but anyhow, she looks over and she catches my eye and she yells across the room. She goes, "Marvin, oh my God, how long has it been?" And everybody stopped and looked, and the two of you know my sense of humor, and this will cover the point of having fun. I said, "Joy, the last time we saw each other, we spent the night together in silk pajamas." And everybody stopped. Well, what that was about was, again, having fun and being unscripted, QVC would take the iconic guests from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., and we'd all be on air at the same time, and we'd reach into a basket and pull out a name of a product. So we would do each other's products. It was friggin' hysterical. And we had to wear silk pajamas. So that was a true story. But unfortunately, that is the fun they stopped having because they tried to quantify it, as Paul said. I looked up the word, so I understand it now. No, I'm only kidding. And they tried to apply some science to the art. And it really was just an art. It was about relationships. Ironically, when Paul and I used to do sales training, one of the things that we would both say to the guests is don't sell anything, just tell your story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is now been lost because they're accounting for every word coming out of their mouth. Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, there are some things that work well. We know historically. If you say sold out the last 3 times on air, if you say only available in QVC, or this is exclusive to QVC, I mean, those kind of make you look at the TV a little bit more intently. But other than that, it's not that crazy. I mean, it's a simple formula, which I've shared with you. Paul knows it. It is basically customer count times purchase frequency times average selling price. That's it. And the problem that's happened is for now 13 quarters in a row, the customer count has been going down. And if you look at the math, the decline in the customer count almost equals the decline in sales, but nobody's calling that out right now.
So there's another element here, Shawn, that I think has to be at least thought about, and that is from the very beginning. There was a guy at QVC named Bruce Sellers who was affiliate relations VP, and Bruce's job was to go to the cable companies and to convince them to carry our signal. And he did a fantastic job for us. I mean, utterly fantastic. He was great at it. As a consequence, from the beginning, the cable industry and the TV shopping industry grew together. What's happened, obviously, is that the cable industry peaked 10 years ago and started to decline. The signals now, I mean, everybody's streaming their own signals, so nobody needs the cable industry as much, and fewer people watch cable. That in and of itself has impacted negatively the customer count for QVC and others. What needed to happen is somebody should have had the prescience to look at that situation and say, hey, you know, this is what's happening to cable, and I don't see this turning around, and we depend on cable for our new eyeballs. We depend on cable for the customer. So we got to figure out where's the customer going, and we got to go there. And they didn't do that.
Right.
Is it, I don't know who wants to tackle this question. Is it too late to pivot? Are we looking in the rearview mirror now? It's done. It's over, Johnny. Or is there still a place for them to pivot?
In my opinion is, what they did with TikTok, I give them credit for.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah.
And creating this alliance where they're 24 hours a day of shopping on TikTok. I think it's pretty cool. Somewhat late, yes, in my opinion. There's also other things pending. I'm involved in one of those things. I don't want to say it yet. But there's things going on. They are trying. And again, for my father's legacy, I want it to work. I've even volunteered for myself to come back in and recreate the vendor board, which I created many, many years ago to kind of create that sense of community. Like Paul is saying, for the customer, it's also equally important to have that for the vendor community. And, we'll see what happens. Paul, what's your opinion?
Well, my opinion is that there are several things that have to be looked at here. One of them is that, as Mark just said, the traditional relationship between the TV shopping companies and the vendor community became over time somewhat toxic, and that has to be cleaned up. Someone has to come up with another model that works equally well for the vendors and isn't so heavily weighted for the TV shopping company. But beyond that, there's a style of presentation that is somewhat different than the style that you were used to or I was used to. It's a little more personal, although we got personal. Mm-hmm. It's less produced. It's more sort of seat of the pants kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that flies in the face of the algorithms. So can they pivot? Yes, they can. It's almost like starting over.
Yeah.
But I think they could pivot. The question is, will they have the wisdom and not and put away the arrogance card long enough to do that?
Right.
And I'm not sure they will.
You know, since you mentioned the talent end of things, the hosts and the guests, I want to talk about this because Paul, for those that don't know, I guess I should explain, for a period of, 4 or 5 years, Paul Kelley was my boss at Shop NBC, and he was in charge of the hosts and training. And I got to point out, too, because when Paul joined Shop NBC, I'd been there probably 15 years, I guess. And I thought, I got this job down. I know how to do it. But I was never so stubborn that I wasn't open to learning there's a better way. And Paul, you taught me more about storytelling than anyone, and I mean this seriously, anyone had ever taught me. Paul would, in a host meeting, play an old radio show clip, for instance, of Abbott and Costello, and somehow tie that in to our ability to tell stories. What is the secret sauce? Is there a secret sauce, Paul?
Well, there is, and it's not that secret. Marvin just said it. He ticked off 3 or 4 things that would get the customer interested, like this sold out the last 3 times. Every product has a story, and every viewer has a story. And the secret sauce is so simple. It's taking the story of the product and telling it in such a way as it dovetails with the customer's story. When you do that, when you take that product and you tell the story in such a way that the customer can actually visualize, can actually see themselves using it, doing it, playing with it, whatever it is, as part of their story, that's when you get the sale. That's how it happens. And it's that simple. You did it every night for years and years.
I mean, there's so many examples of that. You may remember I had this great product that was referred to me called the Lipo in a Box, which is a great name. And it was a patented weave for women's undergarments that literally had no seams, but lifted in the right areas, compressed in the right areas. But the problem was, Shawn, how do you demo this on air without embarrassing the crap out of a woman that might be somewhat heavy, and having her live on air with this, I call it Spanx on steroids. I mean, this item was amazing. So I came up with the idea, going back to the visual, of ordering, which again, nobody orders a 3X model, but I ordered the 3X mannequin. I had it in my parking lot and I'm painting it gloss black. And then I got a small of the Lipo in a Box full bodysuit, and I'm yanking it on this thing, in the parking lot. But what it allowed me to do when I put it on a Lazy Susan and the guest could pivot it on air, we could show the varied compression by a light, like a flesh tone garment against the black of the mannequin. But the point is, you get to have the story, tell the story, show it so people can see it. Because when it's sitting in a package, what does it do? You don't really know. And that's the beauty of TV shopping, is the product gets to come to life and speak if it has the right guest. And by the way, time and time again, it's proven it worked. I think barely 2 months ago, Halo had a charger, one of those little tiny things that air compression, flashlight, a million things it did in this little tiny thing. And great demo, great presentation. And it literally did over $14 million in one day. Wow. Set a record, by the way. So proving the point, even recently, that a great product with a great story and a great guest will work. Mm-hmm. And that is also part of what's missing when you look at, in my opinion, when you look at what's on air a lot, they don't take time to try new things. I will tell you that through my connections with Media One that I love, I send product through them, through to QVC all the time. And the number of things that have been turned down by QVC will make your head spin. Wow. That are great products with great science behind them. And because they don't understand, the whole backstory and how important that is. I mean, when Paul and I were, literally on the road together, it was the Big Orange Bus, it was the 50 and 50 tour, the Southern Women's Tour, and it was, Cobra Borgnine, Cactus Jack, myself, and a lot of other people on tour interfacing with customers and potential new customers for QVC. They stopped doing that years ago.
Mm-hmm. We had, at one point, Shawn, we had a live audience for a QVC show of over 3,000 people.
Wow.
And that's the kind of thing that would happen every week wherever we went.
Right. I can remember at a time where it was just like a revolving door of celebrities going through. You had celebrity after celebrity after celebrity. We've discussed Chuck Woolery being very successful with his products. And, literally A-list celebrities would be there. You'd have whole shows devoted to Star Trek or Star Wars or all these different things. I saw Elton John lately, and that I think was the first celebrity that I've seen in forever on QVC.
Can I tell you a quick story?
Yes.
Because I think your listenership will kind of enjoy this. We sold on QVC for a time the full box set of the Carol Burnett show, the old Carol Burnett show. And there were two guests that came on to do that first set of shows. Yes. And that was Harvey Korman and Tim Conway.
Oh, no. Oh,
and on the same bill that same night, there was another guy who was presenting his product. And that product was Light Bites, which were... which, as you may know, were weight loss nutrition bars.
Right.
And they were very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this particular guest had a cutout of himself and also had a suit that he wore when he was considerably heavier. So he's presenting his Light Bites. And Marvin is earnestly presenting the Light Bites, and here comes Marvin's pants from off stage with Tim Conway in one leg and Harvey Korman in the other. And Marvin lost it. He just lost it. The audience. Yeah. I mean, the phones lit up. Of course, they lit up.
They actually had done that a couple times. There was another time when I was doing that presentation, the pants and the jacket were on a stool next to me. And I turn to grab them. It was that point, like a minute or two in, where I hold them up and I go, look how big I was. And they're not there. That's live TV. And I'm looking to the camera and I said, if anybody knows where my pants and my jacket are, great. And then I hear laughter coming from like stage left. And Harvey's wearing the jacket. Tim has my pants on, and they're both eating Light Bite bars. I have this on a DVD. I had it, saved to a DVD. And Tim says, these things are working already. Let's go with the pants. And he's in his boxer shorts live on QVC. Just classic, but again, fun TV. And that's what has been lost, and they were the greatest guys in the world. Paul, you may remember, because of my connections, I also brought the best of the Carol Burnett show to Shop NBC. Yeah. And we had Vicki Lawrence live, and Tim Conway called in. He was kind of getting up in age at that point. And it was great TV. All the fun stuff, the out-of-the-box stuff, I mean, I'll pat myself in the back. And then another time, because of connections I had in New York, we had Decca Records, which is the oldest record label in the country.
Yep.
The owner of Decca Records calls me up. I met him at a party a couple of months prior, and he goes, Marvin, we got permission to record in the Vatican. First time it's ever been done. I have the music of the Vatican recorded live in the Vatican, and we have the making of on a DVD. It premieres the end of the month. You can have it for 2 weeks before anybody else. I ran upstairs with Keith Stewart, who hired me, and Paul Kelley, and I told Keith what I got, and Keith like literally went, "We're doing it," and rearranged all the programming. And again, great stuff. Now, I was sitting in the cafeteria about 2 days before it's ready to go live, and you have to know Keith Stewart and the way he talked, and Paul will confirm this. I'm sitting in the cafeteria. Keith walks up to me and he goes, Segel, who's the guest? I go, I don't have a guest. It's from the Vatican. I'm going to get the Pope. I go, what do you want? He goes, I don't know. We got to have a guest. So I call back up Decca Records, and they go, how about if I get the composer to call in live from the Vatican? I go, oh my God, wow. That would be amazing. And we had that. And with Daniel Green with the British accent sitting by a fireplace, wow. It was priceless TV. But again, that's the cool stuff you don't get to do anymore. You know, it's a shame.
Excuse me. Talking about guests for a second here, because both of you have been greatly involved with working with guests and training guests. How important, first off, is a guest? And I guess as a follow-up to that, is a guest always necessary? Because I have found there are some shows where I could have done this better without a guest.
It depends on the guest, and it depends on the story. Paul and I did this. We would do a class together, and we'd start in the room, and we'd say, tell us the name of your product, you know, what your name is and what your product does. And I'll never forget this, Paul. You may remember this. There was a husband and wife team. And the wife says, every woman wants to marry their hairdresser. I did. Okay, cute. You know, I went into my show host mode and I said, that's a great story. I said, but why do I use your product versus somebody else's product? Without missing a beat, the hairdresser then says, because your hair is your only accessory, you can't remove or change, so you want it to be perfect. And I literally said, you guys can leave now. Just remember, say that again live on TV. And then you'd have other ones, you know, you'd say, tell us about your product. And they pick up a piece of paper and they read for 10 minutes. And it was like the show ended 4 minutes ago. You know, you can tell pretty quickly if something's going to work or not. And Paul, one other one I remember, and again, you and I did this together. Do you remember Pig of the Month?
Yep.
I beg your pardon? What?
Pig of the Month.
Okay.
It was a petite, attractive woman that created a barbecued rib company for her father because she could not find great ribs for her father, and the father loved it. So she created her own company. She was in the investment banking business. So anyhow, I'm playing show host, as we would do sometimes, and you know, we're the camera set up, it's not live, and I take a bite of the rib and I go, oh my God, Lee, these are amazing. And I dropped to one knee and I said, will you marry me? And she didn't miss a beat. She goes, do you have a ring? I mean, yeah. So like when you can add lib like that and you don't throw anybody off, that's a great guest, you know? And by the way, they were great ribs.
To kind of address that, sometimes, honestly, it's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, you have some guests that are naturally animated and naturally in love with their product, and they are convinced that what they are presenting to you is the best thing in the world.
Right.
That energy reads. Then you have other guests who are sort of naturally reticent, and it becomes like pulling teeth. Or, like Marvin said, they don't know their own product well enough to be able to look into the camera and talk about it. Or they are not natural storytellers. You have to drag it out of them.
Yeah,
and then of course,
yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
No, I mean, and we've seen people, Paul and I. And these are classic stories that have literally frozen live on TV and not a word came out of their mouth when the camera went live. And we've also seen other people pass out and faint live on TV. So, I mean, these are great stories because, my friends would say to me, oh, Marvin, you show up for 10 minutes and you're making a lot of money. It's got to be the easiest job in the world. And they have no idea how much prep there is to make it look easy when you go on air. It's.
We had a guest who was in the studio, was really good. And then when we were doing a 50-50 show in front of a live audience of 2,000, this same guest walked out, looked up, saw this sea of people there, and froze. In the studio, the guest was fine. But put him in front of a bunch of real people, sure, not so much. So it is in its own way a crapshoot. You were on the air overnights, and you had to be both guest and host most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah.
So for you, on the one hand, it was more stressful because you were out there on your own. You had nobody to fall back on. But that's a two-sided coin too, because for you were so well prepared when you went out there that you knew what had to be done. You knew what had to be said, and you did that, and you said that.
And there is our Orson Welles Time's Up signal, and we will indeed continue our interview with Paul and with Marvin on the next show. Thank you for downloading this episode of Are We On The Air? I hope you will find me on social media. My name is Shawn Wilsie. Facebook page is Are We On The Air? And so just search my name out and you will find us. Listen, seriously though, it's a good interview, and I think you'll enjoy part 2 coming up in about 2 weeks' time.
Yes, I know, Travis. That's why we give such bargains.
Copyright 2025, King Bobby Productions, all rights reserved.